Curate Church in Tauranga. They've hit the spotlight recently after making the decision to give a significant piece of property back to iwi as part of righting historical wrongs. Joining us now to talk about the decision to hand their property back to iwi is their lead pastor, the very handsome Joel Milgate. Kia ora, Joel. Firstly, how did you come to this place? How did you come to this decision?
Well, the long and the short of it is that we felt like God asked us to do it. I felt like about 2 years ago that God spoke to me, and I wrestled with that, prayed about that. My wife and I did the same, and then we took it to our elders and our board, and we wrestled with it together, and we felt like, yes, God was asking us to do this, so we're just trying to be obedient and faithful to that word.
Can you just expand on that a little bit, Joel? Because, you know, when some people hear like, God told me to do something, they're like, what does that mean or look like? So for you, what did that kind of, is that just like a sense or a feeling that you have? Is that like a dream, or kind of how does that actually realistically look like when God speaks to you and asks you to do something for you?
Yeah, well, sometimes it's all of those things. This particular time, I was just sitting in my bed, meditating and praying, and that thought came into my mind, but it was clear that it wasn't my thought, it wasn't my words in my head.
It's not cool. It doesn't sound like a very sound financial decision there, Joel.
It's pretty crazy, yeah.
You know, I mean, you might not even have the church, you know, in years to come, depending on what the iwis decide to do.
It's definitely not a sound financial decision. It's a lot of value of asset to give away, and it represents, you know, about a third of our whole asset base as a church. And so, it's definitely not a sound financial decision, but when God speaks, you got to be faithful to that.
That's awesome.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the story behind the piece of land. There's a video online, by the way, if you want to check this out on the Curate Church Facebook page. It's gone all over the world and all around New Zealand. A lot of people have been watching it. It's very cool. But you talk in there about a bit of the history with the land and where it came from and why you're giving it back. So can you kind of maybe tell that story a little bit for anyone listening?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, obviously, up and down the country, you know, Māori have had land taken from them for years. And in Tauranga in particularly, sadly, the church got a little bit wrapped up in that story, probably unintentionally, but they found themselves between some ideologies going on. And where our whole CBD is in Tauranga, that land is called the Te Papa Peninsula. And it was actually given by the local iwi to the Anglican Mission Society as an invitation for them to set up a gospel mission. And the people responded so well to the gospel. They were loving the benefits it was bringing. They welcomed it. So they gave this land for that work. And, you know, skip forward a couple of decades and colonization's in full force. What happened is the Crown's wanting to take more land, and it ends up using that land that the church has as a stronghold in the land wars in our local area. And there's a famous battle called the Battle of Gate Pa, of which the Māori people just fought so bravely and actually were, you know, embarrassed the Crown a little bit. And but you know, long story short, even more land got taken. And post those wars, rather than the church, you know, if it didn't need the land, rather than it giving back to the iwi who gave it to them to steward for the gospel, you know, we've got these worldviews colliding, different ways of seeing ownership. Rather than giving it back to the iwi, they actually divided it up and gave 4/5 of it to the Crown so that the city could be established, and they retained 1/5. And so, you know, the church found itself caught up and being given something for a reason, it being used for something else, and then giving it on for another purpose that it wasn't given for. So us having a piece of land in that area, we could see why God might be asking us to give it away as a part of righting that wrong as a church.
That process of reconciliation is a pretty special thing to be a part of, and obviously you guys have made an amazing gesture by gifting this land and building. What kind of happens with it now? Do you move out of it, or and hand it? Does someone else take over, or do you stay there, or how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so we're in a process, and this whole thing's been a conversation with the Ngāi Tamara Wāhau people about how can we do this? What's going to be a win for everybody? How can we make this happen? And so what's going to happen is that, you know, all going well, by the end of this year, we'll be able to give them the title for the underlying land, and they will have ownership over that. and we will be the leaseholders on that land, and we'll retain ownership of the lease and of the buildings on it. And then the idea is that in 10 years' time, that we'll give them the lease and the buildings, and they'll be able to do with it what they want from then on. And that gives us time to plan where we're going to put the things that we do there. And it gives them time to plan about what they want to do with that space.
What was the reaction when you first got together with the iwi and told them what you wanted to do? Were they surprised or?
Yep, they were surprised, but it was the whole thing was a very humbling experience to just be a part of, and to hear how much it meant, to hear firsthand from them how much they've lost and the disorientation and the grief that's caused them over the years. And I guess in all of this, we've just tried to make it like the story really isn't about Curate giving something away, but about what God's doing in our country. And God's always been wanting to see two people in partnership, not one will colonize another. And, he sent missionaries ahead to create a treaty so that wouldn't happen. And sadly, that hasn't been lived out very well. But it doesn't mean that God's still not wanting to see that dream of two people living together well. And so we're just trying to play our part in that huge story.
Well, it's a very cool story. And I think like you must have seen from the reaction from a lot of people, I think you're playing that part very well. So well done. And thanks for being a leader in that space. Joel, it's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you. I really just feel like I'm a follower. There's many people that have blazed trails well ahead of us, and we're just learning from them.
Thanks for your time this morning, Joel. For generations to come, they're going to look at you and look at the church and the outstanding thing that you've done for not only your church, but for iwi and the generations to follow. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Start it up. The Morning Wake Up on Life FM.